Hi there. My name is Nartana Prem. I have to look at the camera. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of practice of this. I have my name is Nartana Prem, and I'm with Dances of India, and I'm delighted that Elle has asked me to tell some stories today for you. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about the origin of yoga, and then I thought I'd mention some stories from the Buddhist tradition that I think are very appropriate for today and which I love because they're short. They're just short and they make this point. They just kind of open your mind in a way that I don't think a longer story can do, really. It's just short and sweet. But I'll get started with talking a little bit about yoga and what it is and its origins. So along the Ganges River, I would say, my goodness, I would say about 1,000 years before the Christian era, and even before that, there was a forest near the Ganges River. It's hard to believe now with the urban city of Varanasi or Benares, but there was a forest, and it was referred to as a Forest of Bliss, which is this beautiful. I love the image, right, of Forest of Bliss. So in that village, there were many holy men and women, I'm sure. Um, who really went deep into thinking about what life is, about the meaning of life, etc. So while some of the ancient Hindu scripts were being composed, um, were orally, of course, yoga was also something else that was being studied at the time. From what I have read, the earliest mention of yoga is in a Hindu text called the Upanishad, and that's dated to about like 600 BC to a little bit I had the date here. I forgot to write the exact date, but it's usually like 500 to 600 BC up until the late years BC. Dating is always really hard in India. It's really hard to know when something was composed. But the idea, so while yoga is first mentioned in that text, which are called the forest treatises, which I love, the Upanishads are referred to as a branch of knowledge called the forest treatises. The idea of sitting in meditation and developing that ardor, that tapas, is actually earlier than that in another series of texts called the Brahmanas, which is about 800 years before the Christian era. So that's how old we're talking. And of course, I'm sure all of you know the Yoga Sutras that were written by Patanjali is about 3rd century BC to maybe a century after the Christian era. So that's the origin of yoga. And of course, the yoga was first developed as a study of the mind, um, as as a science of the mind. So yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to yoke or to unite. So it's the idea of uniting and yoking all your senses together into one focused, absorbed concentration. And that is very intense. And of course, it is also to unite you with the natural world around you. So that is where yoga comes from. And so I find in this time especially, I think it's incredibly important to develop a real sense of your centeredness, of peace in yourself and being very centered, because I think a lot of things can just swipe you away, from fear of the coronavirus to what's going on with the protests, to all, there's so much now which we didn't have 25 years ago. You out, and if you're not centered, well, I think that can lead into depression, which I think is very common now. So in order to I thought I would just tell a few stories that I love, which help me to understand these ideas of detachment, or detachment, which is, so with all that's going on in the world, you can't let that overwhelm you, right? It's, you have to keep, as I said, keep your center and be detached. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you don't do things for people, or you don't give in charity, of course, but you do all that and you remain detached. And I think there's some confusion. I think in the concept of detachment, people think that means you're emotionally closed or you're aloof, and I guess it can mean that. But in the sense of from where we're coming from, the idea of yoga, it is this idea where you care you care about people more than ever, but you have this detachment inside you, and with the world as well. So my first story of detachment, as I said, these are from the Buddhist tradition. Some are from Zen Buddhism, and I love Zen Buddhism, and so I love how they approach and interpret the mind. So, with the first story I have here, so this is one of my favorite stories about what detachment is. There are two monks walking along, the road, and then suddenly there's like a muddy, like a pond, and then they also see a young girl walking along, in a silk kimono, and so one monk is elder, one is younger. The elder monk sees this young girl who's hesitant to cross the road, to cross the pond, the muddy pond. And, without saying a word, the elder monk picks her up, carries her across, and puts her down. So that evening, the younger monk is thinking a lot about this incident because, well, they're not supposed to touch women. So he goes to the older monk and he asks, I don't understand, sir. You said we're not supposed to touch women, right? And the older monk says, yes. And the younger monk says, well, why did you pick that girl up? And he says, I put her down. You're still carrying her. And I think that's a wonderful illustration of what detachment is. There's another great story that I love where there's and this beautiful pine. There are pines outside. There's a breeze. There's this beautiful moon in the sky, and he's resting in his hut. And all of a sudden, he notices someone. Someone's outside. He can hear sounds in the bushes and stuff, and he realizes it's a thief. So what does he do? He's alone on this hillside, and the thief breaks down the door, and the thief comes in, and the monk says, "Here." And he takes off his robe, he takes off his clothes, and he gives his clothes to him. And he says, he takes off his clothes and he gives them to the thief. And then he says, I wish I could give you the moon as well. And I love that. So then, so the thief is gone and there's the monk staring at the moon. So I do love that story too. That's such a higher sense of detachment, of what of what truly belongs to you and what is just material, even your clothes, right? So I do love that tale. I wanted to tell one of my favorite tales, which I think is also very, very appropriate for this time, about perception. And again, because when you do yoga and you think about your mind, so you're studying your own mind, and one of the hardest things in life, of course, is to deal with other people because everyone has different ways of looking at things. It's also one of the greatest challenges, and it can be wonderful. It can be an amazing challenge, but it can also be difficult. So this idea of perception is fascinating to me, how people think about things, how people think about the same things, how people view color. People see color differently. We have different receptors in our eyes. So it's just fascinating to me. So this is a little story on perception, where there's a monk walking along a road, and then he comes to a river. And then there's a monk opposite, there's a monk on the other bank. So the monk on this side of the river says, excuse me, how do I get to the other side? And the other monk calls back, you are on the other side. And so I love that story. It's all about what, as I said, what perception is. This is one of my favorite stories, actually. So this is about, so we talked about detachment, we've talked about perception, how we see things, how we view things, and now we're going to talk about what is change. And the only thing that's constant, of course, is change. I mean, that's what the study of Buddhism is, right? The essence of change. It all changes. So this is one of my favorite stories. You probably Well, you may have heard this. It's quite popular. So there's a farmer. There's a farmer who has a son, and one day this wild horse comes into his field. So he's so lucky he has this beautiful horse, and so all the neighbors say, "You're so lucky, you had this wild strong horse come into your farm." He says, "Maybe." Well, the next day, the son tries to ride the horse, and it's rearing and cantering. I mean, it's rearing, it's just galloping, and so the son falls off and he breaks his leg. And the neighbors come by and they say, "Oh, you're so unfortunate because your son broke his leg." And the farmer says, "Maybe." And then the next day, so the army officials come by of the country, and they're doing a draft, and so all the young capable men have to join the army, and they come to the house and they see the son has broken his leg, so they cross him off the list. And the neighbors come to the farmer and they say, "Oh, you're so lucky, your son didn't have to join the army." And he says, "Maybe." So I love that, and I think that's particularly appropriate for now, with all that's going on with the virus. There are a lot of people who are very scared, which is understandable. I mean, of course, but if you've suffered, if you have problems with your health, if you have economic issues, of course. But what the story says is this is not going to last forever. Things change, and it will change. And I think one of the great goals in life is to accept all that change with absolute equanimity. There's another wonderful tale. I think this is Chinese, where a monk. So there's a monk who lives outside of this village, and everyone in the village is just so happy that he lives there because they feel his presence blesses the whole village. So when he comes into town, he comes into town once a week. And they always say, "Oh, sir, we're so happy you're here. We feel blessed by your presence." And he says, "Is that so?" And then he goes off, gets his provisions, and then he goes off to his hut. And then what happens one day, a young woman discovers she's pregnant and in the village, and her husband has gone off, so he's left her, and she's like, "What do I do?" And she tells her parents, and the parents don't know what to do. This is such a shame on the family. So they go to the monk, and the monk says, "Well, keep her with me in the hut, and she can stay here until she has a child." So the parents are very grateful. But the next time the monk goes into the town, everyone chatters and says, "Oh, he's got a young girl staying with him. He's a pervert." And so some people even tell him that. And he says, "Is that so?" And he gets his provisions and then he leaves. And then what happens? She, after 9 months, she has a baby, and it turns out the husband hasn't left her at all. He's gone off to do some task he had to do, and he comes back. So they can leave the hut, and then everyone else knows about this. The husband's come back. There's a baby, and the family's happy. So the next time the monk comes into the village, they say, "Oh, sir, you're so wonderful to take that woman in. They are blessed. We are blessed." And he says, "Is that so?" So I love that story too. It's all about change um, just never to let yourself get too riled up over what can happen to you or to someone else, because we do hear the news about everyone all the time around the world, and it's overwhelming. So you do have to keep your center, absolutely. And then I wanted to say, I thought there was one more story I had here. Oh, and this is I just thought about this with social media, how we get everyone's chattering all the time, and there are many good things that can come from social media. I mean, of course, but that can be overwhelming as well. And it just reminded me, though, of no matter how hard we try, like maybe to stay away from it or to not look at it, it's hard. And there is this one story I love, and this is from Zen Buddhism as well, where there are these 4 disciples who have agreed to observe a vow of silence. So it starts off well, they're all in this hut and they're completely silent. And then as twilight comes, it gets dark, the oil lamp, it doesn't work. It's flickering and it's about to go off. and one monk, he's so upset at the servant, and he calls out the servant. He says, "Look at you! You didn't take care of the lamp." And the second monk says, "You shouldn't talk. What are you doing?" And then the third monk says, "You two are too stupid. You've ruined the vow of silence." And the fourth one leaps up and says, "I'm the only one who didn't talk." So I love that story as well. I think that's very relevant to what we're going through now with what social media and what can be overwhelming. And I wanted to end with a story. Actually, so this is from the Bhagavad Gita. I'm sure some of you saw the talk on the Gita and the way that Krishna talks about yoga and three different kinds of yoga: the yoga of knowledge and the yoga of devotion. And so in the copy of the Bhagavad Gita that I have here, there is a wonderful story. By the way, let me just show this to you if you guys ever have it. This is the Bhagavad Gita by, can you see it there? By Barbara Stoller Miller. It's translated. So there is a story in back, which is actually one of my favorite stories, and I don't think it's that popular. And it was written by Henry David Thoreau, and it has to do with, it's called The Artists of Kuru. And so it's based on the word Kuru is in the Bhagavad Gita was told during a war, and it was on a battlefield, the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So this is called The Artists of Kuru, and I love this story. And it's about an artist who's totally devoted to his art. He wants it to be perfect. And he decides to work on a staff, to make the perfect staff. So he goes into a forest. He goes into a forest, and he takes time to find the right wood, the right tree to chop down. And then he sees a perfect tree, and he chops it down, and he starts working on his staff. He's so devoted to this that he doesn't even realize how much time is passing. He doesn't even realize the king that was there when he went to cut the tree is gone. The king is gone. There's another king. There are new families in town. There are new traders in town. Everything is changing, but he's so devoted to his art. He finally finds the perfect piece of wood he wants to work on, and he takes it away to work on it, to make the staff. And he's so absorbed in it, he doesn't realize how much time passes. Eons pass, actually. Someone else takes over the kingdom entirely. There's another country that comes in. But he's so absorbed on his stick that he does not age. And I love that story. And Henry David Thoreau, he says it perfectly in here, where is there's a line that is really beautiful, and it is in here. I'm sorry, I should have underlined the line I wanted to read you. He had made a new system in making a staff, a world with full and fair proportions, in which, though the old cities and dynasties had passed away, fair and more glorious ones had taken their place. And now he saw by the heap of shavings still fresh at his feet that for him and his work, the former lapse of time had been an illusion, and that no more time had elapsed than is required for a single scintillation from the brain of Brahma to fall and inflame the tinder of a mortal brain. So in Hinduism, there are enormous cycles of time. So, and they say that in that time that, millions of years is but a second in the mind of Brahma, who's the creator deity. So I do love that story. But this is a line I wanted to tell you, which I couldn't find earlier. This is it. As he made no compromise with time, time kept out of his way and only sighed at a distance because he could not overcome him. And I do love that. So when you are absorbed into what you're doing, you have complete focus and concentration in your mind into what you're doing. That is, um, well, it's called samadhi, but that is your absolute concentration, and there is no time anymore. And there's something almost that has to be experienced. Is, I think, hard to explain really, really well. So yeah, so I think those were the stories I wanted to say. And I know I missed, didn't I? I said three kinds of devotion. There's the intellect, there's a, sorry, three kinds of yoga. There's the karma yoga, which is the yoga of work. There's the bhakti, which is the yoga of devotion. And then there's the yoga of the intellect. So these are the three paths, three yogas that are mentioned in the Gita, which I'm sure you've already seen on the earlier talk. But thank you so much, and I do hope that you enjoyed these stories. As I said, the little stories are really wonderful for just opening up your mind. Thank you.